but I do always need to remind myself, I'm not writing Dog Man, or whatever, even whatever the other equivalents are. And, I'm doing, what I do to the best of my ability, and I'm continuously trying to improve what I do. So.
Welcome to You May Contribute a Verse. I'm Brenna Jeanneret, rock climber, mom, and kidlit author of The Law of Birthdays, illustrated by Marina Contra. I'm joined by my co-host, Josh Monken, dad, kidlit author, and science communicator, and podcast wizard Jon Seymour, author, illustrator of A Morning with Blueberry. This episode is proudly sponsored by Canadian children's book publisher Tealmore Press, where every book sold supports reforestation. Looking to revive your bookshelf in the new year? Check out Tealmore's full catalog at tealmorepress.com, including titles like Naked, Supermoon, and coming this spring, Fungi Are More Than Mushrooms, written by Alicia Gabriel and illustrated by Vivian Sarkny. This nonfiction title will fascinate kids and adults alike. Today's guest is Erika Cohen Lyons, author of Solomon and the Memory Stone, illustrated by Yinan Pitia. We chat about dual language manuscripts and how to make them work, finding your voice and leaning into who you are as a creator. Here's Erika's verse.
Well, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you. And do you want to tell us about your book launch? Because it's a very unique way to celebrate this last one. Josh, we were just chatting about it briefly before you came on.
Right, so my newest book just came out on May 7th, and just by happenstance, I had been looking and I saw that there was a Jewish creators retreat at Highlights Foundation, and I kind of signed up and then sort of looked at the dates, and it was just sort of kind of serendipity that my book birthday was in the middle of the Jewish creators retreat. So, what better way to spend a book birthday than with, 25 other, kidlit creators. So it was really, really special. I got to read the book, talk about it, with really first of all, I usually read my books to 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, but to sit with a room full of adults, which is the first time I've done that, and read a picture book to them. So it was really, really special. So I couldn't have planned it better.
Yeah.
They sat on the floor and had carpet.
Exactly, with milk, with little juice boxes, right?
Animal crackers.
We sat in our chairs.
You know what? That's what we crave, right? Is the connection to our audience. So,
Exactly.
Anyways, but tell us the name of the book that just came out. So
we didn't cover that part yet.
Knows. Yeah.
We did. We're just kind of starting from the back.
Yeah.
Solomon and the Memory Stone, and it's with Apples and Honey Press, which is kind of it's a Jewish publisher, and it's my second book with them. And my illustrator is Yinan Pitia, and he's actually happens to be Yemenite himself. Which I was really excited. I was really excited about when I first came up with the idea for the book. It's a friend's family story that I modified, for the book. I had to make a lot of changes to the real story. But the one thing I said is I really wanted an illustrator that was Jewish and also from the Arab world. So we would call it Mizrahi, but and I said preferably Yemenite. But that, seemed like a really hard task. And they came back to me. It took a little bit longer to find an illustrator, to really find the right person. And one day I get this message saying, we found somebody, and we're really, really excited. And I don't know, with other books that I've had, I have a few out now, I never really had an image really clearly in my head about what the illustrations would look like. I'm not being an illustrator myself. And this one, it was strange because I kind of had a real idea of palette and medium and of what I thought it would look like and what I wanted it to look like. And then I open up this portfolio of his, to see it, and he does exactly what I pictured in my head, and it's everything I imagined and more, So it was really, 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 really great.
Yeah.
Did Apples, and feel free to shout out your editor at Apples and Honey, but were they aware
sorry?
No, let's talk about your editor after this, I guess, this question.
Yeah.
Were they aware of the style that you were looking for? That seems like a special opportunity to sort of have a voice in that.
No, they weren't at all. I sort of never voiced that because I think I was really, because to me the focus is really getting somebody that understood the region that they were working in. It's a lot. Not that an illustrator can't illustrate a region that they're not familiar with, but I think it's a really, really big learning curve because you'd have to get in, sort of all the Jewish customs, and then also sort of that Middle Eastern feel to it as well, and then also the historical accuracy. So I really felt that that was important to me, and I didn't really talk about what I really envisioned for it, and it just really worked out. So he also happens to be a lovely guy too, but.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression of Yemen is that it's pretty small. Like it's not. I mean, there aren't a lot of people from Yemen, and then if you whittle it down even further to an illustrator specifically from there for Kidlit,
For sure, yeah.
Did for the American market.
So there's like the one guy, and you guys found him.
Yeah, I got the guy.
Like,
I
right,
got
like the one.
Another Yemenite story. Yeah, I have another Yemenite story that I want to do, and I already said to him, I'm like, just to let you know, if this happens, like, you're in.
Yeah, I need you. I need you. Yeah.
Yeah. And especially the particular story that I told, it starts out, the first page, it starts out saying in a village outside of Sana'a, which is, one small town in Yemen. And that's actually where his family's from. He said, so as soon as he opened the manuscript and saw this, he said, whoa, this is exactly where they're from. So, again, like, it's just really, and actually something really special happened too, which I think that very few people have, that my illustrator sort of made an editorial change at like the 11th hour. He kind of said at one point, he said, I've talked to, this is, I've done a few books now, and a lot of them I have a big, a pretty good understanding of the history. And just sort of do, but Yemen, this is a history I didn't know. And so I did more research and spoke to more experts on this book than I've done for a novel. So I really, really did a lot in this. And nobody that I knew, I was trying to find the balance when you're using different languages of how much, other languages, how many other, words to put in other than English. And so we're sort of struggling with that. And then also when it came to things like mother and father, I thought I would just do it in Hebrew. And I talked to my friends that are Yemenite, and that's what they call their parents, because it's now. The story's from 1881. And sort of at the 11th hour, he said, I don't know if this is really for me to say, but I don't know if she should use, Ima, Abba, and Saba for mother, father, and grandfather. He's like, because I think at that time they would have said, and he says, Ad, and Jad, which is, it's in Arabic, and so the editor's like, oh my gosh. So she's like, well, let me ask Erika if she minds if we make this change. And I mean, mind. It was I couldn't think of a better value add, and that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't this exact right person. So it was really important for that.
Wow. And I mean, and that was something, because I just read that book before we jumped on to familiarize myself, with our chat. And so first of all, the illustrations, it's like so sort of like, I mean, I have never been to an Arab country, but it's exactly what I sort of picture in my brain, like very dry, lots of sand, that sort of like dreamy, sort of like sandy feel.
Yeah, exactly,
like it just is a lot. I don't know. It was like, it drew me in like right away. And then the other thing is, I noticed too when I was first reading, and the fact that you put it in italics was very helpful, because otherwise a Western reader reads it as like you're like sort of thinking about like funny. What like what is to come, and I was like no wait, okay, and then I saw the other the other two that had been italicized also, but it was like it was a very smart ad, because I knew from the context clues exactly what you were saying. So anyways, I noticed that right away.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like there's always like the question about whether to put foreign words in italics, and there's always like different schools of thought about whether you should just accept that people don't all use mommy and daddy, or there's different people from different cultures that are also speaking English, and whether you should do that, or whether that's sort of others people or not. But you're right, in this context it would have definitely made sense. So
I have a manuscript that plays with French cognates into English to sort of introduce some French words, and it's also I feel that that's almost necessary to sort of root people in the culture that you're trying to communicate about. But the funny story about that is that our Brenna's and my mutual buddy Emily, shout out to Emily, did a read aloud of an early draft of that, and it's just it's kind of a gut check or a reality check when you realize you should have no preconceived notions that people are going to understand how to properly pronounce or inflect the non-English words that you're putting into your manuscripts. Is maybe different, but still, the concept is sound.
Yeah, I was gonna say, with something else that comes in with names too. I think that when you're choosing names for other cultures, right, you want really the book to have, to really feel embedded in that culture. But then also, there's also balancing accessibility. I know, like in my first book that came out, it was the same thing. I was trying to think of a name that would work in Hebrew, but would also work in English. And I ended up choosing for my main character, Mira, because I said it was sort of there's only so many points that you want your reader to struggle with new words and new vocabulary. I mean, so some of it, yes, sort of push them into that, out of their comfort zone. But in the same vein, you also need to make enough things familiar, so that they can sort of get into, sort of just get lost in the story of it. So
totally, it's an interesting point on like flow of the story, or sort of carrying your reader through, because it makes me think of like sort of writing a nonfiction text. Also, you're sort of like you try to walk that line between how much do I put actually in the story, in the text, like this, these like
explanatory exposition.
Yeah, or like, what do I do with these? Is this a sidebar? Is this something for like, a more advanced reader? And you sort of break it up. So it's like, here's the story, here's the option. You know what I mean? Like trying to figure out exactly what you're saying. How much do you want the reader to sort of pause and, reflect on whatever fact this is, and then carry on with the story, so they don't get sort of lost in that part of it. I think it's, it's a similar thought on just flow of story and, bringing the reader.
I mean, part of the beauty of picture books, right, is like if you're doing, I also am working on middle grade, and in middle grade, I find that you sort of sometimes have to sort of sneak in that explanation. Say, I mean, if I was saying I'd say or as my friends call their mother, call their mother, or something like that, where you have to kind of sneak in that that explanatory note and sort of make it flow into the story. But in picture books, part of the beauty is you have the pictures, so you look and you can tell the grandfather is a grandfather. He's a man with a white beard who looks older and has wrinkles. So you can sort of cheat and sort of get around having to put in some explanation. Because the pictures can carry it. So.
And with middle grade too, I will say you have that sort of luxury of more words also. Like you can sort of like take a minute to be like, oh, by the way, this is what this means. Okay, carry on. It's, yeah.
Right. Because there goes half your word count, right? When you're,
exactly. You're like, oh, shoot. I explained this one fact, I guess, like I'm going to have to figure out. Yeah. What do I do with this?
I got to cut out the grandpa's dialogue because I have to explain who he is or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm finding at least more and more of my books are also having like small glossaries at the end, which I do appreciate. Like I love a glossary, right? So, I also unlocked another level of like personal achievement. I have a map in this book. Like I wanted a map in a picture. I love maps in books, and I have a map in like a map in the back. I'm like, so.
Yes. Actually, yeah, like we should talk a little bit about that, because I wanted to say also in the illustrations, like I loved that page where it had the map like on the hand, sort of like the path. Yeah. That was very cool. And so then you also got a map in the back, which is also very cool. Did you have to, was that suggested by you? Or was that something you like fought for or asked for?
No, I think that was all the illustrator again. Like
wow.
It's a dream. It's a dream. The map on the hands, it's a line in the book where the little boy is like Salimon is tracing his grandfather's wrinkles on his hands, and the grandfather says, it's a map so we can remember where we've been, where we've come from, or I think that was the line. I forget the line. But so that map I wrote into the text. The other map is actually a proper, map, but like one of those old sort of antique world, old world maps. So I said that is definitely something I need to frame. Like so.
Very cool.
I have to
at some point.
Think back. I mean, Genu and the Snake is so rooted in geography too. I guess maybe I was thinking that there was a map in that, but maybe there's not.
Oh. One of my, the snake just died. One of my, they made me take the word death out though. Like in the original quote, it was like, charity will save you from death. And they're like, no, you can't have the word death. But like, I don't know, other people's picture books have death and have, really kind of gory things. But they said to me, no, I have to remove the word. So
that is so interesting. Yeah, that is really interesting, because I recently had just sort of a short discussion about this. I'm taking Justin Cologne's, hi Justin, shout out to him, his humor class. And we chatted about sort of the intersection of like benign and violation, the benign violation theory in writing humor. And basically
That sounds very
Yeah, I know.
academic.
It's very, I know, because
Yeah,
it's very
it sounds smart.
Justin.
It sounds smart.
Right. It's very Justin because he did all this research and he knows all this stuff. So I'm like, oh, cool. Like, I didn't know about this. So, anyways, so where they intersect is sort of like where the humor comes in. So with kids, if it's, you know, if it's silly and whatever, and the violation, the quote unquote like violation is not, it doesn't like push too hard on their boundaries, then it's okay. Then you can find the humor. So what made me think of this conversation is the fact that Creepy Carrots, when it first came out, they subbed it as Evil Carrots, and the editor was like, this is too far into the violation zone. Like, this is too much for kids. Let's do Creepy Carrots, and then it's not so, you know, it's not so like, you know, evil or deathy or whatever. So the word death, you know, that it, I feel like I've seen it in picture books too, and it really depends on, I think, the context or how you're playing with it in order to make it sort of like benign enough for a kid that they're like, oh, okay, like that doesn't bother me. You know what I mean? So it's really interesting. Yeah.
And and Erika, this conversation's about you, but as we're talking about it occurs to me that I just critiqued a manuscript of yours. Obviously, Brenna, you're aware of me doing this, and I stumbled on that same kind of concept. And I think I attributed that to more my own hang-ups with thinking about and talking about death than, you know, the way that you very, you know, reasonably treated it in your manuscript. It's just it's a weird charged concept for a lot of people.
Well, I do a much softer version of the real history, because the real history, I mean, it's really, I mean, a lot of people didn't survive this journey, you know. So I kind of softened it, you know, and still giving children, because the idea of that it was really, really difficult and sort of what they faced, but without, right, their actual sort of real reality of how horrible it was. But I mean, this book, I have a book coming out in September, and I mean, spoiler alert, but there's a shipwreck, and everybody on the ship is killed except for 7 men and 7 women. And it's sort of, it's, you know, and that's how it reads in the book, that, you know, 7, I don't exactly say the other ones were killed, but you do get the message from the illustrations.
They're the only ones who made it, kind of thing.
Right, that's exactly what I say. It's exactly what I say, and only 7 men and 7 women, you know, were washed ashore. So you get the idea.
5-year-olds reading it can go,
only.
oh, the other ones went back home or something.
Yeah. But when you look at the illustrations will give you a clue that it was not good, you know, like not good. So, I mean, that's in, and that's coming out in September. So, you know, I think that there's some room, and I think maybe it depends, you know, right. Maybe the beheading would be a step too far, but, you know, the shipwreck, you know.
There was a threat of he bedding, and he gets sent to bed instead of beheading. Maybe. I'm just workshopping that for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Nice.
a lot gentler.
So much gentler. Yeah. He had to go into a timeout. We won't see him again. He's
A
there for a
permanent
while.
timeout.
Yeah.
A 2-piece timeout.
Nice. Oh my gosh.
Yikes.
No, but I mean, it's, you know, it's a challenge and part of the fun, right? I was a journalist, and I think the idea of taking these sort of like complex histories and these big events that are sometimes, you know, really, really horrific, and finding a way to distill them and still keep this kernel of truth in, you know, for children. So it still is true and it still is real, but then sort of just distilling it and sort of telling it in a gentler way, but still telling the whole story.
So, I mean, that's kind of a perfect segue into, you know, how did you get into picture books? Because you have this background in law and journalism, and, you know, now you're this prolific picture book author. So how did that happen?
So I kind of always knew that I had a novel in me, but I was like that person who, like, for, you know, 20 years you'd see me, I'm like, yeah, one day I'm going to write a novel. But, you know, I didn't do the sitting down and writing the novel part of that, right?
Right.
And then I
Pesky
really decided yeah, I know. I think it is important, that part of it. I think in the process, from what I know so far.
It seems pivotal. Yeah, like it could make or break a novel, really.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. No, but so I kind of knew that I had this novel in me, and I had my own magazine for about 9 years, and I had just closed it right before the pandemic hit, and I was going to really I was going to write the novel, right? And in Hong Kong, you know, we live in an apartment, and the pandemic hit, and then we were all. And I have a lot of children, and I have rescue cats, and we were all, you know, locked in an apartment, not in a house with a yard and a, you know, in Hong Kong, the pandemic was a lot longer than it was in the rest of the world. In China, sort of our experience was very different. It was, you know, long. And so this novel that I had started working on, just barely started, I have one child that has special needs, so the online learning she couldn't do without me sitting with her. So this novel was not going to happen, and we were all on top of each other. And one day I just wrote this. I never thought I was a picture book writer, and I wrote this one picture book about the pandemic. Again, there was nothing else I was thinking about except for the pandemic. So what else was I going to write? And I sent it to a good friend who was published, and I sent it to her and said, "Can you just read this thing that I wrote?" And she read it, and she's like, "You did it." She's like, "You wrote not a manuscript, you wrote a book." She said, "Send it out now. You wrote a book. Like this is a book." So that was the first picture book manuscript that I really sent out, and it is a book. that was my debut.
It's time for this week's book reviews from Josh. Inspired by editing our last episode with agent Adria Goetz, Josh finally checked out last year's MILLIE FLEUR'S Poison Garden by Christy Mandin. This book is delightful and such a clear love letter to letting your freak flag fly. Not only does it show us that it's okay to be weird in ways that let you be you, but it shows that owning your personal weirdness gives others social permission to grow into their own personal weird. It's a great lesson in self-identity, but also in how we all live in the context of our own environments and societies. Just a joy to read. From John, Parrotfish Has a Superpower by Jill Esbaum is a fun and fact-packed look, that's a tongue twister, John, at an awesomely fun and unique fish. Kids will love learning how parrotfish munch coral and poop sand. Yes, really. Bob Shea's bold, colorful art makes the ocean pop, and it's a quirky read that'll have everyone hooked on marine life. John gives this 5 tasty polyps out of 5. And my review for this week is The Island Before No by Christina Us and illustrated by Hudson Christie. What a brilliant commentary on the power of the word no. An island of seals has never heard the word, but when a boy comes along and casually disregards their niceties with the short 2-letter word, they are forced to learn it. At first, it comes out cumbersome, quiet, and gentle. They're worried that saying it this way won't wield the power they need it to. But a strange thing happens. No matter how they say it, the word no does its job, because as a wise woman once said, no is a complete sentence. Get this one today, and don't forget to get your own reviews and library requests in. It's the #1 way to help an author's sales.
It is so rare that the first one that you write gets published. I feel like we've talked to one other author on this podcast where that has happened, which is just, wow.
I had kind of fooled around a little bit, like here and there, like writing with a critique group, but it was more like I was lazy. Like I was working on a novel. I was going to work on this novel, and I would kind of throw together this thing, but not really. I didn't really ever do it seriously or think, okay, this is something until that one. And I just, again, I still want to write novels, but apparently I am also a picture book writer. And it's fun. I mean, I really like, yeah. So, but I appreciate, the form, it's a lot like journalism and poetry, and both of those things I do and love. So.
And I don't think we've said it, or maybe we said it in passing and I breezed by it, but your debut was Alone Together on Dan Street.
Correct. That's right. Yeah.
Did that book also get your agent, Karen?
No, not at all. I actually sold that one on my own. So again, it was at this Berryman House or Apples and Honey Press. Yeah. I sent it into them, and it was fast because it was a pandemic book, they wanted to get it out really quickly. So it did move on a pretty fast timeline. And then I sold my second on my own as well, and that was Counting on Naama, and it was a feminist STEM retelling of the Noah's Ark story, where she's a math and engineering genius. And
I love
and
that.
then,
Wow, yeah.
Right. Like how you just casually slip that in. That's like, wow,
yeah, exactly,
that's like such a powerful, wow, amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So that was my number 2. That was my second one I sold. And then I ended up getting my agent on my middle grade. So I signed on a middle grade, which
interesting.
Which has yet to sell. So we kind of we kind of put it out there, and then decided to pull back. I'm working on another middle grade, and hopefully the second one will sell, and then hopefully we can sort of maybe piggyback the first one on the second. So.
I think probably the issue is you took too long to explain who Grandpa was. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
So I don't know if you feel this way, but I recently had a conversation with Brian Gerline about this, and he had asked me, because I've written a couple of middle grades myself, and my first one, I felt like it was good, but I sort of had to like refigure out how to write again, because middle grade is a whole different genre. You have to like it's a different craft. Like it just is. It's a different beast. So I don't know if you feel like this, but he had asked me, he's like, does it feel easier, once you've got all these picture books that you sort of have like honed your skill on, to jump to another genre? And I was like, no, not at all.
Yeah, no,
my first
no.
one felt like, like the first pancake always feels like, what I mean? And then now I've got this second one and I'm like, okay, great. Like this, like this is probably the one. I've got the rhythm and I sort of feel the voice and this feels better. And anyways, so I don't know what you thought.
Yeah, but even like, even with like picture book writing, even after your first year, second, I have a bunch in the pipeline. I mean, are they easier? No, each one is its own thing.
Totally.
There are certain things that I have, certain things just by working on craft that, I'm definitely getting better at, but each one is its own thing and each one's its own challenges, and you're sort of starting from scratch each time you have a new idea, So it would be great if it was just, gets easy and.
Okay, so take me back. You sold your first two independently. Well, I was going to ask if you said you had landed Karen with your middle grade. Do you feel like, and this is something we ask regularly, do you feel like your first two books helped with that process?
I don't think that they did. I don't know. I don't think they did. I mean, it certainly, obviously, it obviously didn't hurt, but I don't think that she was, now I think she says I think she has that she's looking for picture book writers, but I think at the time she wasn't. So I don't know how much, and also I think that also I came in with picture books, both with Jewish publishers, and again, I have books that are with mainstream publishers and books that are with, smaller Jewish publishers, but I don't know that would put you over the line. If I came in with this big contract, maybe that would have made a difference. But I think that it was really just on the middle grade alone. I was querying different agents at the time, just a small, very targeted group. I know people have different theories about how to query. And my querying, I did it a few different times over the years in very, very tiny, tiny groups. But I was trying at the same time, basically, picture book queries that I was trying middle grade queries. And my middle grade queries did a lot better than my picture book queries. Not that that's scientifically significant. It could be that my picture books weren't as strong as what I was querying in the middle grade side, but I found that it was harder.
Or timing, or who you were querying,
Oh my God, so many variables. Yeah. And now you have all these picture books out, right? But have yet to sell a middle grade, which is like, not what your data says. So like, who knows? It's just, yeah.
Well, but the middle grade stuff, it's so hard, right? I mean, I always say to people, like, not that picture books are easy, but they're short, right? Like, to get my books are a little bit longer than typical ones. I usually am submitting about the 750 word mark to about 800 word mark. But still, 800 good words is still a lot easier than 50,000 good words, right? Like,
yeah. And I mean, if you have to like rewrite from a different point of view, 800 words is a lot easier to rewrite in a different POV
right.
than a whole middle grade of like 40,000 words, right? Like that's
speaking from experience, right?
Yes,
yeah,
like
exactly.
That's what I'm doing right now. I'm like pulling I have to go back and like rewrite this whole, anyways. Yeah, so that's way easier. Yeah. Or to like pull a plot line, that's not working, or, whatever, scour for like meaning and be like, oh shoot, this is not, I gotta pull this whole thread. It's like.
The other thing I found too, I mean, right, you talk about sort of rejection in the industry, no matter where you are. And, I have a lot of people say to me like, oh, I just want to get this agent. And then I'm like, oh, ha, ha, ha.
Yeah, right. Just
get
wait.
ready for more.
You get the agent, but you're still, there's no riding that, But I do think that when you get rejected on, and you sort of have your heart set on selling, a manuscript, which obviously we all do, and we put so much love into these manuscripts. But when you get rejected on a picture book, you spent whatever finite amount of time on that picture book, whereas when you're writing a middle grade or a YA, and you take people, you talk to people who say 8 years and 5 years, and and then that sort of reaches that point where it becomes this dead manuscript. I don't know, I think that's a lot harder. I mean, you have a moment where you're sad and you think, okay, but this is part of the industry. I'm going to get rejected. I have X number of other ones in the pipeline or I'm working on, and okay, you kind of let it go, and You have to. But with a longer work, I think it would be much, much more difficult.
Devastating.
I think too, like this is not a place that I'm in, but I know that other writers, are able to sub on proposal, which I feel like that's a much softer way to do it, right? Because if the proposal gets passed on or rejected, it's like, okay, well, thank you for saving me all that work. Like, I get it. This idea isn't for you. You know what I mean? But if
I would really appreciate that,
right?
Yeah.
But if they love the proposal, it's like, okay, great. Like, then I'm extra motivated because it's like somebody on the other end thinks this is a worthy idea. Like, let me dive in. Let me pour all this energy into it. At least there's that sort of like, yeah, I think we can work with this, as opposed to, yeah, you write the whole thing, you submit it, and then it's like not happening.
That begs an interesting question, because you've acknowledged that you love exploring this untold history. What have you encountered any resistance to that, or was that ever any question? I mean, obviously you've seen some success from it, but is it hard to sell histories and stories of lived experiences that people aren't familiar with and couldn't recall?
Yeah, sure, but I feel like again, it's certainly harder to break out really into sort of real mainstream sales with a really small history as a new author. But I do think that it's a matter of knowing sort of your niche, and that's the kind of story that I would have loved to have read when I was younger, and the kind of story. So I think that it might be harder to sell, but it's the only thing that it's the only thing I really want to do. Like, I'm really, really passionate about doing that. That's what I was doing when I was doing nonfiction. I've done chapters for nonfiction books, and it's the same. That's the stuff that I'm writing for adults as well. So I think it's just sort of, knowing that this is my niche and sort of sticking with it. And yeah, it might not be the most lucrative, the most popular. I'm not going to be, write the next Dog Man. I'm going to buy the next one.
Who is? Yeah, right.
I have one kid that will only read that.
Same.
But, but I don't need to be that, right? It's sort of, I just need to keep on, working on my craft and my corner of the market and doing what I do, and doing that to the best that I can do. And I think the idea of when it's hard, we always compare ourselves to other authors, to one another, and I think it's really hard to entirely get away from that. But I do always need to remind myself, I'm not writing Dog Man, or whatever, even whatever the other equivalents are, and I'm doing what I do to the best of my ability, and I'm continuously trying to improve what I do.
I mean, that must be so affirming and helpful though, in terms of, just picking new stories and writing the way that you write, because, everybody talks so much about finding your voice and figuring out, what you have to say, what do you have to offer. Yeah. But you are so, versed and rooted in this very specific niche. That just feels like that might be really helpful. It makes me think of bowling with bumpers on, right? Because I'm out here bowling with no barriers, no bumpers, and I just for a long time ping-ponging all over the place before I kind of figured out okay, this is what I like to write. I can write in different genres, but still sort of keep my voice, and this is where I am good at doing stuff. Anyways, it feels like you sort of came to the picture book market with that voice intact, which must have been helpful.
Which is the same voice I used in the middle grade. And it's funny because every once in a while, I'll sort of feel the pressure. And when I was sending my agent 2 ideas, I just sent her about a couple weeks ago these 2 ideas, and one I thought, what, maybe I should try to do something entirely outside and have this nonfiction-y kind of animal story, which I think would be popular. I think it's a great idea. Well, of course, it was my idea. So
right.
It's great. And then the other one is exactly the kind of thing that I do that's niche, and I'm not sure where it would fit in a market, or and especially sort of at this moment, with all the tension in the world. Mm-hmm. And she looked at the list and she said, this is a great idea. My one story is a sort of goat related story. She's like, this is a great idea, but this is a kind of story that anyone could write this story. And yeah, you can write it well, but other people could write this. Mm-hmm. And she's like, your other idea, that's what you need to do. It's who you are. And I like that, even if I know who I am, but having that sort of check and balance, and somebody saying, you know who you are, and that's really what you need to keep on doing more of that. So it really is affirming.
I would like to hear more about the magazine. that you ran?
Oh, yeah. So I ran it for 9 years. It was a registered nonprofit in Hong Kong and a 501c3 in the US. So, non-registered nonprofit. And it's called Asian Jewish Life. So it was entirely focused on, I run the Hong Kong Jewish Historical Society. And I also have done a lot of other work in sort of the area of Jewish history in the Far East. So the magazine was entirely focused on the art, culture, and history of Jews in the region. And again, I originally, the Asia part, I correct people, just really so Far East. So not, yes, the Middle East is also parts of Asia, but really just focused on, countries really, other countries in the region. My readers were worldwide. I distributed 10,000 copies in issue in print because I love a print magazine. And then also I did it online, and I did it for about 9 years, but I was doing all the fundraising, all the grant writing, all the editing, all the content. I mean, I had writers for the content. I was also writing myself, and I was also doing all the layout.
Wow.
And,
Wow, Erika.
So yeah, so it was really, and the distribution. I forgot that part of it as well.
Gosh.
So at the end, like, it was such a labor of love. I was paying my writers, I was paying obviously my printer and sort of anyone that I needed to pay. And it was hard. I wasn't paying myself, and I don't know when I would have reached that level. And it got to the point where I just sort of had to make choices, and I closed it sort of reluctantly. Now everyone's like, "Oh, I would have given you funding." Like now I'm like, "Well, where were you 10 years ago?" Right? Like,
Totally.
But it was great. I mean, I think I learned so much about history, about publishing. Enough to know when people say, talk about self-publishing. I mean, I learned that I don't want to self-publish my picture books. I think that it's a great model, self-publishing, for some people. I knew that I had been effectively doing self-publishing for 9 years, and it's a lot of work, and I wanted to move on and do something, else in publishing. And again,
Operating a legitimate, publishing enterprise. In essence, I mean, operating with all that, all the professionalism and whatever that it takes to get an entire magazine out. It's interesting though, and I'm sure you draw a direct line between the voice and what you explored with that magazine, and obviously the subject matter that you're interested in writing about most for kids now.
Yeah, and I think that also, from all that, everyone says, do you have any regrets? I got speaking engagements sort of all over the world, and I became sort of like a quasi-expert specifically in Jews of India and Jews in China, through that and through other years doing kind of similar work. But, I knew when I closed that, I knew that was going to sort of inform the books that I was going to write as well. Like for me, I was going to have, and again, when it comes to talking about research, a lot of these things that I'm working on, I don't have to sit down. The Yemen book was a whole different beast, but a lot of times I don't need to do research. I mean, yes, to just sort of fact check myself, but I have a really good overview of the histories and specifics within the histories.
You did 9 years of research.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then plus to get to the point where I opened the magazine. So right.
Wow.
Right. So everyone's like, you have to research. I'm like, yeah, I've been researching for 9 years. Or how long have you been working on this book? Well,
I had this other magazine for a while.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. From the moment you started that
Yeah.
research, you were working on sort of everything to come from that. So.
Yeah. Well, write what you know, for sure.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. I mean, the history, the rich history that you're working with is like, you could probably write books for years and years and years. Like there's so many stories in there.
Absolutely.
But also, you have books out and you're working on middle grade and all sort of within this niche, and it just makes me think, once you do find your voice, like even if your voice is like, absurd or funny or lyrical or whatever, there is so much you can explore in that space, like so much you can expand on. Like you don't really, once you find it, like go with that, like what you were saying,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
really lean into that, because there's just so much that you can kind of uncover. You don't necessarily have to jump around. Like you don't have to be funny. You don't have to be lyrical. You can just find that thing and really like explore.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think that with your niche, I think that it's great to try other things still. I think that's sort of what helps you develop as a writer. But then it comes back down, and so not to say that I'm not going to one day write, a really silly. Well, I did write a book of, where Noah's wife becomes is an engineering genius.
Which is amazing.
It's not silly, it's empowering.
She invents a desert, the first automatic camel feeder and a life preserver. And I think my line was like, but who needs a life preserver in the desert? The first prototype. But, so it's not that I'm not going to do something that's just straight funny. I mean, that was still really text-based.
Yeah.
Not that relevant.
Right.
But I mean, maybe I will. But
Right.
again, knowing what the core of my work is going to be in this one place.
Yeah.
With this,
and just, just really rooted in that place too, because it still is very much comes from all of that research and that passion of,
Exactly.
Right. That history of where you're coming from. So it's, you can write funny, right? But then in the end,
all of that research.
Yeah, right.
All of it.
Every single piece. Totally.
Everything.
Yeah, but I was going to say though, well, first of all, thank you for being so generous with your time, but I wanted to make sure if you have things that you can shout out before we go, to please shout them out so that people can sort of look for them or pre-order them.
Yeah, sure. Well, Solomon and the Memory Stone has been out for just a few days now. So Solomon and Memory Stone, look for it online, sort of wherever books are sold. And coming in September, I have On a Chariot of Fire, and that's with my illustrator is Sonia Benjamin, and that's with Levine Carrido, and I'm really excited for that. And I just got my author's copy, advanced copy in the post yesterday, and it's,
That's so
it's one thing
exciting.
seeing it on the screen and holding it in your hand, and so I'm so excited. And also in September, I have Mixed Up Mooncakes, and that's with Quiltree. And I have a co-author, Christina Matula, and my illustrator is Tracy Subisak, and it's also beautiful. I haven't held it in my hand yet, but that's also coming in September as well. So, and it's about that one's about a little girl who celebrates both Mid-Autumn Festival and the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, and they fall on the same night. Most years, actually, they fall on the same night. The calendars are very similar.
Oh,
They're
interesting.
small. Yeah, I can nerd out and go into the whole explanation how they're different, but they're effectively both lunisolar calendars. So the overlap is, happens often.
Is that what led to the co-authorship?
Yeah, we know each other from Hong Kong. So Christina and I know each other from Hong Kong, and I think she kind of proposed the idea initially. But when we were trying to figure out we wanted to play with a child that celebrates both holidays and somehow combine the experience. And I said, well, the holidays fall on the same night, which you wouldn't know unless you're really living in Hong Kong or a similar place. But we know from my school school calendar, my kids get off for the Jewish my kids go to a Jewish day school, so they get off for the Jewish holidays, all the Chinese holidays, and then sort of the regular Western Gregorian.
So they just
holidays.
don't really go to school.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they never. And we also, because we're in Hong Kong and I have Chinese children, we celebrate the Chinese festivals also. So in real life, we are trying to find ways to sort of combine them. That is our reality. So, I said to her, they fall on the same days and you can combine them. So, so that's sort of how that idea was born. And we started playing with what festivals we thought worked best. So hopefully we'll do another one. We have another idea for a second one. So,
Yeah. How did you find co-authorship?
So it's great. I think also Christina and I, we knew each other. We got to work face to face, which also I think made it a little bit easier. And we just got down a really good system where she would kind of do the writing and pass it off to me, especially because we were writing from two different traditions. So Christina was going to cover really sort of the Chinese aspects of it. Not that I didn't have some knowledge base, but that was really speaking to her traditions. And I was going to cover sort of the Jewish part. So it really worked out well that it was really an even split. And we really wanted to make sure they were balanced, that we didn't let one holiday sort of take over the narrative. So if she wrote 3 sentences and they went to a market, then I wrote 3 sentences and they went to a market.
Oh, cool!
So
yeah,
it was just really easy.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. Well, congratulations on all of the things you have coming out, and thank you again for coming on and sharing it all with us. I'm excited to get this episode out.
That sounds great. Thank you.
We've covered some awesome ground today. Thank you.
Thanks for listening this week.
Find all of our episodes and other associated links and information at linktree.com/verseshow.
Or reach out to us on Twitter. Thanks again, and we'll see you next verse.
Bye.